Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I've spoken to you too much today already, and actually I want to just point you towards a live chat I'm going to have with my mate Tom Williamson tonight on my other channel, A Tippling Philosopher. So I'll make this one a relatively short one now. Always say that. But please come and join us at A Tippling Philosophy. You have to go there. I'll put a post out with a link to it. And we're going to talk about flags and vexillology. So if you're interested in flags and how they're designed, what their function is, and examples of good ones and bad ones, it's a completely random topic to what I'd usually talk about, particularly on that channel. I could have easily housed it here on this channel, but come and join us. So Tom Williamson's a member here, so you might have interacted with him on these threads as well. Right, let's go first to a good thread on a clear explanation of the complications involved in ATACMS. It's a couple of days old now, but it does look at the possibly oncoming onset of ATACMS deliveries to Ukraine from the US. So it's starting to actually look like Ukraine will get ATACMS, also known as MGM 140. A short discussion is probably in order about how this came about, how it will be implemented, and what its operational implications are. This is from Bryn Tannehill, who often gives some good threads, author of 3 books, former naval aviator, etc., etc. Okay, so the basics for people who don't already know is that ATACMS is a GPS and inertially guided short-range ballistic missile, SLBM, and can be fired from HIMARS or the M270, so any guided multiple launch rocket system that the Ukrainians are generally using, supplied by NATO countries. It weighs about 2 tons. It has about 500-pound warhead with a range of around 190 miles, 300 kilometers. So that's, if you're thinking 84 kilometers for the present HIMARS, 300 kilometers is a good deal more than that. Until now, the US has steadfastly refused to supply ATACMS. The suspected reasons range from worries that it would cause Russia to escalate, fears that Ukraine would use US-made weapons on Russian soil, and that US needed them for other theaters. Only 3,700 have been built, and many of those have either been used in conflicts or sold to other countries. It's unknown publicly how many the US has in its inventory now, or how deep the US believes it needs its ATACMS magazine to be. ATACMS is an older weapons system. It was introduced in 1991, and it's planned to be replaced by a longer-range precision strike missile, PRSM, whose initial operational capability, IOC, is expected in CY23, so 2023. A PRSM can be fired from HIMARS as well. That's the intention. So likely as a result of observing the war in Ukraine, the US has ordered more ATACMS in the financial year 2023 budget and bought more early operational capability PRSMs, but some reports say that the US found additional missiles under the sofa type thing. There's a likely explanation. Being an older system, there are probably some ATACMS that aged out, most likely based on the age of the solid rocket motors, and were marked for disposal. They don't register on active inventory, and the US has a lot of ancient stuff in deep storage. I'd love to say that the system is great at tracking everything, but yeah, no. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if it turned out that one had thought to on-site check expired munitions awaiting disposal, but later found ATACMS that weren't on active inventory. This seems pretty plausible to me, to be honest. What does expired mean? Well, basically it's how long can something sit in storage and still have acceptable dud rate. Solid rocket motors on missiles is one of the big items. They can develop cracks. You don't want them exploding or misfiring in the tube or on the rail. The upshot of this is that a minimum, these ATACMS are going to need to go through an inspection before they go out, particularly if they're of their rocket motors. Catastrophic failure would destroy the HIMARS launch vehicle. And you can see an example of surface missile misfires in a video that she provides. This means a delay. There's also going to be the matter that HIMARS systems in Ukraine, the ATACMS capability was removed before they were sent. There's also probably going to be an insistence on mods to ensure that they can't be used on Russian soil. So more delay. I cannot tell you how long the delay will be, but I'd advise a certain amount of patience. If things don't seem to be happening quickly enough, you really don't want these things misfiring, exploding, or going where they're not supposed to. Some other reasons for the potential change of heart is that Scalp ER or Storm Shadow already provide a deepish strike capability. The US may also want to prod Germany to start supplying Taurus cruise missiles, which are on a par with Scalp. We've seen this before with tanks. So what does this mean tactically, operationally, strategically? First off, SRBMs, so ATACMS, are harder to shoot down than cruise missiles. The only Russian SAM system with a credible anti-ballistic missile ABM capability is the S-400. That's the S-400. We saw one of them taken out in the Western Cape of Crimea. Patriot has performed well against SRBMs, Kinjal, Iskander, but Russian equipment has a nasty habit of overpromising and under-delivering, and ABM intercepts are hard. The US struggled mightily for decades to get it even sort of right. Top initial target is likely to be S-400 radars first to remove the only Russian capability of shooting down ATACMS. ATACMS flies quickly through the S-400 sites, flies quickly enough that the S-400 sites probably can't pack up and leave quickly enough. I'd expect coordination with Storm Shadow launches. After that, focus will be on exceptionally high value targets, too far away or too well defended to hit with scarce cruise missiles, hardened C2 nodes, so command and control nodes, ships that are pierside in Crimea, large ammunition depots, Kerch, and other bridges, high value aircraft. Which brings up the question, what will the effect be? It's not a Wunderwaffe, it will be it won't single-handedly win the war. But oh wow, will it complicate things for the Russians? ATACMS can hit everywhere in occupied Ukraine, including Crimea, with minimal warning. ATACMS give Ukraine the ability to hold most Russian high-value assets at risk as long as they are in Ukraine. This creates all sorts of dilemmas and calculations with no good answers. I mean, it does make you wonder, doesn't it, why the US just didn't give them a long time ago. And I guess, well, the two main arguments, as mentioned, are escalation, and they needed a certain amount of them in their own inventory and they didn't have enough of them. So I wonder whether the delay has been in building new ones, manufacturing new ones. I know they said we can't, or the ones we're manufacturing for people abroad, but I wonder whether that's really the delay. I don't know. One of the first is trying to assess if something is valuable enough for Ukraine to spend a precious limited resource like ATACMS on it. Would Ukraine use one on a colonel, a brigadier general, one or two Ka-52s, barracks in Mariupol, a small corvette in Sevastopol? How big does the ammunition dump have to be before Ukraine decides it's schwackable? It's unknowable and allows Ukraine to potentially exercise reflexive control. Ukraine might not think that a corvette or colonel is really worth an ATACMS, but let's wargame it out. If Ukraine hits a target that's not worth it, but it gets a desired behavior, it can be worth it. For example, blowing a 20-foot hole in the ship from the deck through to the keel might induce Russia to pull ships out of Crimean ports. So it's not only about hitting the target itself and the value in that. You might say, well, ATACMS wasn't worth doing that. But actually that then makes Russia do a whole load of behaviors that end up being worth using that missile for. Outside of port, they're more vulnerable to drones. So Russia pulls their warships further back. This is a win. So if you induced most senior Russian officers to all hide far from the front in a bunker back in Rostov, or pull all their Ka-52s back to Russian territory. Sure, the Ka-52s can fly to the front from inside of Russian territory, but their loiter time is greatly reduced because it adds an additional 50 nautical miles distance they have to fly to get to the front if they're operating out of Taganrog. Much has already been written on ATACMS and Kerch, but suffice it to say that ATACMS could have significant effect on the ground lines of communication choke points. The biggest gain is ATACMS' ability to shape Russian behavior, which has bigger downstream tactical, operational, and strategic effects. Nice thread, like it. Hope you appreciate that thread. Good stuff. Thank you, Bryn Tannehill. Right, here's just a look at a command and control node, if you like. There's a lot of tech here. I mean, it didn't look like this in Battle of the Bulge, did it? Goodness me. And they're looking at all sorts of things at any one given point. Pretty incredible. So there you go. Right. I presume that's a command and control node and not actually someone playing around with the TV screens in a local TV shop. You never know. Right, just something a bit random for you. Probably already seen this, some of you, but let's have a look at a Ukrainian mortar group or pair, and I do have the sound on. Oh yes, no music. That was a risk. Music comes in though. Good timing. I like it. Nice little bit of fun for the mortar crew there as they deal death to people. We must remember that. Another side of war that we rarely see, the military workshop is busy even in the middle of the night. Military repairmen work 24/7. They have no time to waste. A skilled mechanic is always worth his weight in gold in the armed forces. And this is so true. And we kind of do forget that for all of the kind of heroes on the front line, there are heroes behind them. Yeah, they might not be putting their lives on the line, although some repair shops are targeted, of course. But they are doing work that is absolutely vital for the success of any given armed force. And here, you know, so some great photos, actually, some pictures of those working repair shops 24/7. So give a thought to them. Right, I'm just going to go just as my final bit now, because this is a relatively short one. I talked about Elon Musk and Starlink, right? I don't want to be hitting on him like purposefully, but I do. It is really, everyone's talking about it, right? So this is really important stuff. There are articles being written on this. Congress has asked for, or some in Congress have asked for an investigation, so on and so forth. I had a couple of comments today. A number of these, you know, I love your analysis, ongoing analysis, but you're leaning a bit too into your Elon bias, so on and so forth. So a couple of points here. So Jonathan, your analysis on Starlink is flawed. You need to distinguish between Starlink supplied to US military to Ukraine and others. If you don't, you are ranting inaccurate BS. Apparently Starlink supplied to US are not geofenced. So I'm actually going to, it's really important that I say what I'm going to say, because actually it's information for all of you to understand what's going on. And I'm going to just pick some holes in the claims here. Apparently Starlink supplied to the US are not geofenced. Only the recent ones. This way, Musk can pass responsibility to the US for use. It is annoying to hear you crap on. Actually, I've been pretty accurate with what I've been saying, and I'll expand that. Were the Starlink with interrupted signals the US supplied Starlinks or not? Get your facts right. I'm no fan of Musk, but dislike inaccurate ranting. Okay, well, hopefully I'll be able to, you know, give you some more information. And again, he said, you're really annoying me with the uninformed analysis. Musk provided non-geofenced Starlink to US for Ukraine. Do you understand the difference of Musk facilitating an attack directly as opposed to going through the US military? You like arguing it is annoying that the world is flat. The civilian Starlink is likely still geofenced, but it is Starlink supplied to the Ukraine via the US. Okay, first of all, the US has just done a deal. The US Department of Defense has just done a deal with Starlink to provide non-geofenced Starlink terminals, about 400 to 500, I think, at the moment. But this is on the back of at least 30,000 terminals that are geofenced. Okay, so when you talk about the terminals are not geofenced, well, it depends which terminals you're talking about, and I'm not sure all the existing terminals they had would switch over to being non-geofenced. So I think there's also this argument that Starlink, and I think this is really clever, right? So this is not a criticism of Musk per se. This is really good business acumen. It's kind of like Microsoft Office type thing. I've used this analogy before. I know it's limited, but you know, you get it for free, like scare quotes, on PCs and laptops for like 20, 30 years. And then when everyone's completely dependent upon using Microsoft Office, you go, and now we're going to charge you $100 or whatever, right? And everyone's like, no, you bastards. And it's like, we've captured you, and now we're going to charge you. And this is basically the model that Musk seemed to have used here, which is, yeah, we're going to help Ukraine. Then I think, as I reported before, he got pressured from China, because actually China and Russia, I think, is he the only company in China, literally the only company that is allowed to operate on its own independently. And so he's really dependent on China staying on site, because China produces an awful lot of lithium, which he needs for his Tesla batteries and Tesla cars and SpaceX and all sorts, right? So he's beholden to Chinese influence. He's also beholden to Russian influence, because he gets a lot of raw materials from Russia. So I did a whole segment on this some time back. So he is absolutely, for his business, absolutely dependent on both Russia and China. And it was as soon as that became apparent that he was getting a lot of influence from those nations that he started changing his tune on Ukraine, and then started saying you can't use my stuff for offensive things. But of course, it's a false distinction between offense and defense when you are defending a country. All of your offense, all of Ukraine's offense is defensive. So that and it's really important for me to say this, because that distinction that he and Starlink and SpaceX, or whoever it is, in charge of Starlink, everyone that promotes that rationale is wrong. Like, it's a false distinction. Because if you're shooting down a cruise missile that's just about to blow up on you, that's not offensive, that's defensive. But what if you're shooting that cruise missile just as it takes off? What about just before it takes off? What about in the warehouse? All of those have the same end result. But what Musk is saying is you can't shoot that cruise missile unless it's taken off. Unless it's kind of over your skies even. I don't even know how he defines offensive and defensive. It is a false delineation there, I would argue, especially when you're a defensive army fighting for your own territorial integrity when the invader is on your land. So when you're attacking them, when you're going on a counter-offensive, it's still defensive. You're defending your territory from them by attacking them. So there's a whole big problem there. Anyway, so there's a whole... So what I was talking about is this whole business thing. So he's saying, right, Ukraine, you can have these, and then when it became announced as the backbone of the Ukrainian war effort, Starlink, he then said, this is worth 20 million. And I think there's an interesting thing. So he said it's costing $20 million a month or something, but actually I'm not sure it was a cost. That stuff is going on and doing its stuff. Like, you accessing that might be the value you put in it, but it's not a cost of $20 million a month. So I think there's an interesting discussion to be had around that. But then he then said, this is costing too much. I'm not going to pay for it anymore. So, and again, pay for it, scare quotes. So either the Department of Defense pays up, or the Pentagon pays up, or I'm Oski. And then the Pentagon started paying. And then they did a deal because of the whole... not allowing Crimea to be hit because it's geofenced. So the Pentagon had to then do a deal with Starlink so that they had terminals that were not geofenced, which means that there isn't geographical boundaries to their usage, right? So, for example, they're geofenced in occupied territories and Crimea, so on and so forth. So Pentagon have now done this deal, and the details of that deal have not been released by anyone. Goodness knows how much money is involved. But anyway, Ukraine has some 400 to 500, as far as I understand it, terminals. But again, that's on the back of a load of terminals that have already been provided. So the cost. So by the 6th of April 2022, so this is the beginning of the war, SpaceX had sent over 5,000 Starlink terminals. So it's right at the beginning. SpaceX had donated 3,667 of 73% of the 5,000 terminals and removed the monthly service fees. So again, these are service fees. So are they actual costs? While USAID had purchased the balance of the terminals. So right from the beginning, actually, there's a lot of money coming from other people buying this stuff. According to the Washington Post, Starlink equipment sent to Ukraine was funded by SpaceX, including partial funding by the US Agency for International Development, as well as the governments of France and Poland. By mid-August 2022, Ukraine internet service was being provided by more than 20,000 Starlink terminals. So when my critic here is saying, you don't know what you're talking about, these are not geofenced, by August 2022, Ukraine had 20,000 geofenced Starlink terminals. But there's more than that. So I think we don't really know how many there are over there, but there was another 10,000 that were then provided, I think, by Germany after that. So additional funding from European countries. Musk, however, recommitted in October the 15th. So this is when he went off for one and continued to pay for Starlink services. By December, Ukraine had secured additional funding from several European countries. So funding was coming in, and quote, all financial issues had been resolved. By February 2023, Mikhailo Fedorov called Musk one of the biggest private donors to Ukraine's future victory, estimated SpaceX contributions as over $100 million, which is amazing. And like Starlink is amazing, and Musk has done a great thing in allowing them, but he's also done some really annoying things by not allowing certain things to happen as well. So it's difficult, and also that 100 million is rather like saying that the money that the US say they are giving in military aid is also correct. Like I've pulled apart them to say, actually, if you're giving a bunch of M113s and you're saying the value is $50 million for all those M113s, and they are being replaced and they're obsolete and they're sitting in a warehouse doing nothing, then actually the value of that stuff is like nothing. Or it's an opportunity cost of not giving to another country, but then you'd be giving them or selling them or whatever. But essentially, it is not the value that you are claiming it. And I would say that's the argument here as well. So the value of the Starlink terminals, considering it appears that the Starlink terminals were, I think, purchased, and it's the services that are being provided for free. But if those services, the costs of those satellites are going round and round doing their stuff, is a cost that's taking place irrespective of how many Starlink terminals are being used in Ukraine. So I don't think that there are huge costs involved. That's my claim. Correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong there. The costs are going to be minimal, at any rate, as I would understand it, or distributed among all terminals ever bought as a kind of like dividing the cost of sending all the satellites up among all the terminals and people using them, etc., etc. But you get my point. It's far more complex than that. I'm trying to find so as far as I know it, because I'm sure there's another 10,000 German German-bought Starlinks as well, but I can't find where that is. But nonetheless, there is at the very bare minimum 30,000 Starlink terminals. I'd say probably a lot more than that are geofenced Starlink terminals. That then you've got 400 to 500 non-geofenced Starlink terminals. So when this critic says, you need to understand that they're not geofenced, as according to the US provision. Actually, that's only the recent ones. But when you're talking about the Starlink outage last night, at the same time, very conveniently at the same time as this attack, exactly the same time, that is an outage that has nothing to do with geofencing. So these are two separate things. So, I mean, unfortunately, I think this critic is just wrong on several counts here. So this is how Sundry's a tech site reports it. So despite the fact that the Pentagon ordered special terminals for Ukraine, Starlink suffered a massive failure during the attack on Russian ships by surface drones. On the night of September the 13th, so last night around 3 a.m., Starlink satellite internet service experienced a large-scale failure. According to monitoring services, it started around 2:30 and lasted to 4:30, so that's Ukrainian local time, and is evidenced by down detector and net blocks, which reported such a global problem observed by Starlink subscribers around the world. This failure was timed to coincide with Ukraine's attack on Russian ships in the Black Sea in the Bay of occupied Sevastopol. At the same time, while the cruise missile strike hit the Rostov-on-Don submarine, along with the large landing ship Minsk in a dry dock, there were simultaneous attacks by surface drones on Russian ships, as declared by the Russian Federation. 3 drones were involved, but they were destroyed and the attack was unsuccessful. And according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the attack took place around 3 a.m. That is, it coincided with a breakdown in Starlink's operations. It should be noted that last year, as it became known thanks to the biography of Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson, Elon Musk had already decided to at least not turn on, according to other information, to specifically turn off Starlink near the occupied Crimea during the attack of Ukrainian surface drones on Russian ships. The reasoning behind this decision was the alleged reluctance to draw the United States into the war, which of course is I think bunkum as a rationale. At the same time, according to a number of reputable Western media outlets, in June of this year, the Pentagon purchased Starlink terminals for Ukraine with the ability to customize signals in order to realize its goals. We were talking about 400 to 500 such terminals, as has been reported in many places. And while it may be unfair and unreasonable to suspect Elon Musk of preventing another Ukrainian attack, I mean, I did say there are 3 options. Maybe a fourth. One option is it's just coincidence of the outage I'm talking about. Second is Russian hacking, although other people say it's impossible for that to have happened. You can't have a global outage with Russian hacking, apparently. Third option is Starlink or Musk did it on purpose. Well, actually, no, I can't think of any other options really for the outage. So actually, 3 options there, and pick one of them. What's the most plausible? Although turning off the entire Starlink network for this purpose may look like a rather open step. I don't know what they mean by that. This is especially true when the US Congress is already calling on an investigation into Elon Musk's activities, as US foreign policy should be decided by the government, not an individual billionaire. Moreover, the Pentagon has been considering and testing Starlink as one of the global communication systems for its military since at least 2020. So let's go into that. So, like Starlink, talking about not being offensive, right? I don't want to rant, but that I don't want it to be used for offensive means is bullshit. It's absolute BS from Musk. Why? Because he's done deals with the US military for the last 3 years. SpaceX has won a $149 million contract from the Space Development Agency to leverage the success of Starlink constellation and build custom satellites for the US Department of Defense, right? US DOD using those satellites, what? For military offensive, Department of Defense, for offensive operations, right? Starlink is integral in the US military capabilities, right? You can bet your bottom dollar that Starlink did not stipulate to US DOD there that they could only use it for defensive means. You can bet $140 million that they didn't do that. So this kind of approach to Ukraine is double standards. That was what year was this? 2020, right? SpaceX gets 1.9 million Air Force contract for Starlink services in Europe and Africa. Did they stipulate that was only for defensive reasons? I bet your bottom dollar they didn't. So you can accuse me of like always trying to pick holes in Musk, but I'm sorry, there are holes there to be picked, right? This is not consistent. Elon Musk is approaching the Ukraine war with double standards and a lack of consistency, I would charge. And the only thing I can think of is he's doing that because of pressure from Russia, who are saying he's the most amazing businessman, incidentally, today. Putin, the dictator, saying he's an amazing businessman, talented and all this kind of stuff. We think he's great. And incidentally, we hold the key to me and Xi hold the keys to Musk's success in terms of raw materials. How coincidental. SpaceX unveils Starshield, a military variation of Starlink satellites. This is going back to December last year. Elon Musk, SpaceX is expanding its Starlink satellite technology into military applications with a new business line called Starshield. Is he stipulating it can only be used defensively because he doesn't want to be involved in making, in a war? Like all those reasons he's given for not helping Ukraine and for geofencing, all of those reasons given for geofencing render this absolutely contradictory. While Starlink is designed for consumer and commercial use, Starshield is designed for government use. Few details are available about the intended scope and capabilities of Starshield. So he's happy in principle to have stuff used for offensive means, just when it's not convenient for him, for business reasons, like when it's against Russia or China. Or China aren't fans of it. So, by all means, criticize my positions and please point out if I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'll definitely walk it back. But there's something dodgy going on here. There's definitely something dodgy when the guy is making a shed load of money out of the US Department of Defense and the US government for offensive reasons. I don't mean the reasons are offensive. I mean, he's making a load of money out of the government for the application of his technology to be used, offensively for militaries. And he's saying that Ukraine can't use his technology for offensive means, but they can use it for defensive means, and that's a false distinction anyway. So this is a big problem. Please let me know if this is out of place. And yes, a lot of you will be bored about me talking about Musk, but when you've got him being it's hard not to get not to talk about. I have to talk about him when you've got Mikhailo Fedorov saying he's one of the biggest private donors of Ukraine's future victory. Then I have to be able to talk about him, right? And it is important. And all the other news networks, all the news networks are talking about Musk and Starlink and what's going on. So it's super important. There is a huge, I mean, this Wikipedia page just on Starlink satellite services in Ukraine is a really interesting read. You know, 150,000 people are using the system every day by May 2022. Well, with 1 and a bit years later on, you can imagine how widespread Starlink usage is in Ukraine and how important it is. Oh, here it is. February 2023, Fedorov announced the arrival of 10,000 Starlink terminals provided by the German government. So in July 2022, European countries have sent Starlink terminals to Ukraine from their own supplies. So it's US, Europe, throwing them loads of Starlinks, but they're geofenced, and it's only now they're starting to get non-geofenced pieces, terminals. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please come and check out Tom and I talk about flags later, but go to A Tippling Philosopher to find that live. Anyway, thank you so much for all your support. Really do appreciate it. Big thanks to Alice Dobrovec, Mikey Ward from Mikey from Cambridge, F. David Davis, Tell Me Who You Are Limited, David Wilson, and John Cobbett. Really do appreciate all of your support. Very kind of you. Anyway, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Doodle pips.